Are you ready to move into a leadership position? Do you have interests and ambitions that you want to pursue, but feel like you don't know how to take that next step? Maybe you want to start your own coaching or consulting agency. I'm Mel, and I help educators define their career path through correct mindset, knowing your options, and getting prepared for your career transition. I will show you how to level up your leadership skills, share your expertise in a new way, create impact on a larger scale, and put your leadership in motion. As an educator for over 20 years, I started to feel underused and like I had more to give. I knew when the time had come for me to leave the classroom and affect change on a larger level. Now, I'm ready to help you determine where your talents and skills mesh with your passions and interests. Put your leadership in motion and move into that next phase of your educational career journey. Let me help you define your career path by having the right mindset, knowing your options, and getting prepared for that next leadership position. So power up and put your leadership in motion. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Mel Vandevort. Today I have with me David Richards, and David is the founder and the CEO of ChangemakerEDU. And I'm really excited to have David on the show because he is talking about micro schools. And that is something that I've kind of heard a little bit about and was really interested in. And once I saw that he wanted to be on the show, I'm like, yeah, let's do this, because that is something that I could always use more information about, but it's becoming a big trend now. And I think that this might be something that's really taking hold, especially since how we were talking just before the show, and you said you have been super busy with all of the things. So welcome to the show, David.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You are so welcome. So tell us about you. Tell us about what you do, how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, I feel like thinking about how I landed as the founder and CEO of ChangemakerEDU it's like going back to what I usually say, which is I was a banker turned educator turned entrepreneur. So I got out of school and was like, okay, I need to make money, right? We all go through this. And so instead of following my passion of teaching, I went and became a corporate banker because I had done a lot of stuff in college where I loved working with kids. So I was a corporate banker for all of my 20s. I worked 2 blocks from the White House. I wore a 3-piece suit and I was totally miserable, right?
Yeah.
So everything on the outside looked good, but I was like, this is not me. I'm not supposed to be a corporate banker. So I found this book called Finding Your Own North Star by Martha Beck. And I went into a Borders back when they had those on the corner. And I read the whole entire book cover to cover after work. And I just said, I'm going to become a teacher. I'm doing it. And so I quit my job and I went back to school, went to grad school, got my teaching certification here in California. And then next thing you know, I went from corporate banking to teaching in urban schools in Oakland, California. And that was a little bit of a transition, but I absolutely
I can imagine. Definitely.
I absolutely loved working with teenagers, and I felt really inspired by them, but I felt really disenchanted by the public school system, especially in urban, big public high school. Just felt like it was not inspiring for me. And so I was kind of deciding what I was going to do. And then I found this really amazing charter school that was just starting back in the early 2000s. It was like one portable at the back of a high school. And the founder had this like big vision to have multiple schools and to have schools across the country. And she ended up meeting that vision. So I worked there for almost 10 years. And I went from teacher to principal to assistant superintendent and helped them go from 1 to 10 schools in California and Washington State. And then we took that model, and actually it's now a tech platform, or like it's called the Summit Learning Platform. And now it's in 300 public schools across the country. And so super exciting work. And that was really meaningful. And a lot of the stuff we're doing with micro schools now was kind of built in that time of building those amazing schools. And then I had a burnout moment where I was completely exhausted after doing that for 10 years. And my kids were 2 and 4. And I had a health breakdown and things were just not pretty. And so I quit my executive job and I decided I was going to go start my own small charter school. So I did that about 10 years ago. And again, all preparing me for this work I'm doing with micro schools now. So I have a charter school here in California that I passed on to our principal, and it's a small K-8 charter school. And then a few years ago, I started doing consulting and started meeting these amazing people that were starting micro schools. And they were calling me and saying, "Hey, you started all these schools. Could you help us?" And so all of a sudden I had this thriving consulting business that was helping people open micro schools. And I got really, really excited. And then I realized that I needed to create more of a comprehensive program to help people open micro schools across the country. And that's how Changemaker EDU was born.
Fabulous. That is quite a little journey from
Yeah.
corporate into education and then starting schools. I mean, that is an amazing journey. I kind of get where you're coming from with the whole corporate's not for you. I started as a business major and I
Okay.
did not love it. I did
Yeah.
not love it. And I saw my best friend, she was in the education program, and I'm like, wow, she's way happier than I am. And so
Exactly.
I just went in. I had already signed up for classes for that last semester.
Yeah.
And I went in and changed my major the week school was starting, the week classes
Right.
were starting, and became an
Okay.
educator. So, and
Great.
I've loved it ever since, ever
It's
since. So,
very fulfilling. Yep.
yes, it is. I'm sure just like many of them out there, or like me, many of the people out there, they're like, what is a micro school? So let's
Yeah.
just start there. What is a micro school? Because that's probably something that's a little foreign to many of us, even educators.
For sure. Yeah. And there is a national microschooling center now, and they're doing really great work of gathering data. They do an annual report and they share sort of like the percentage of microschools and all the really great facts that you can learn. So some of the things I'll be talking about, I did get from their reports, but basically they define a microschool as the size. So 5 to about 150 students is considered a micro school. We know them. They're not new, right? We know them as like the one room schoolhouse. Like my mother-in-law went to a one room schoolhouse in Nebraska, in rural Nebraska. And she's kind of like, this is not innovative, right? Like this is what we've been doing forever. But it's the idea that you have smaller learning environments, so 5 to 150. And that's what makes it a micro school. And then in terms of how they're structured, 80% of them are private. This is what I got from the report. 80% of them are private funded micro schools, meaning it's like a small private school. However, depending on your state, a lot of them are most of that tuition, or if not all of it, could be coming from a voucher and education savings account. So if you're in Arizona, there's around $7,000 to $10,000 for each family, each child, to utilize towards a private school. So there's a
Mhm.
bunch of micro schools opening in Arizona because a family can go. I actually think it's like 7,000 to about 20,000 if you have an IEP. So you can have a micro school that's 8,000 a year and for private tuition, and the families could be paying almost nothing, right? And then states like Florida, it's like 10,000 per student. And then there's other states that might have programs for special needs students and such. But so the majority of the micro schools are private, and then the other 20% are either a district micro school or a charter micro school. And I think you'll start seeing more district and charter micro schools opening. There's already some foundations and other incubators that are starting to get people to do public micro schools so that we can have more array of types of micro schools in terms of how they're funded. So that's really what makes a micro school. And then there's some interesting facts about what happens in micro schools. Like 60% of them have self-directed learning just because they're small
Mhm.
and maybe they used to be a homeschool group or whatever. And so it's really
Right.
about personalized learning, self-directed learning. That's just a natural thing that happens. I really love that stat because at Changemaker, that's one of our biggest goals is to have a more intimate kind of personalized learning environment. And it's happening naturally when you have these smaller class sizes and people just know each other better.
Yeah, and when you said homeschool, that's exactly where my mind was going when you were talking about 5 students, because I know
Mhm.
some families who have 5 students, so
Exactly.
their own children. So basically
Yep.
they're running a micro school
They
out of
are.
their home.
Yep.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there's like district level micro schools, which
Mhm.
kind of seems, I mean, that might seem kind of absurd to some of us because when we think districts, we think large amounts of students.
Yeah.
But there are some schools who have just, 200 students, and that's their entire campus. So,
Yep.
I mean, it's not too far fetched that it
Yeah.
would be a district level. So I'm questioning, are there any micro schools? And I know you're not in, I mean, you're in a different state than I am,
Yeah.
but are there micro schools that are run through the State Department that actually receive State Department funds?
I'm not sure about that one, but I will say that there are district schools that are doing, and typically what the district schools are doing is they're doing like a program within a program. So they're saying like, we have a group of children with autism, or we have a group of children with whatever it may be. And it's like they need smaller 10 to 1, 15 to 1, like they need smaller environments. And they're kind of seeing that these private micro schools are having a lot of success. So they're kind of creating this program within a program on the side and maybe just putting two classrooms aside, which I mean, we've been doing in district schools for years, right? But now it's actually called a micro school. And so I think that's happening there. And then obviously they're being funded through the state and the federal government and all of that. So, but I don't know specifically if there's like state run ones or county ones. But what's interesting is if you define it from 5 to 150 students, there's probably a lot of micro schools that we're not even including in this definition, right?
Right, right, exactly. And there are school districts that have, I mean, there are some K-8 districts right here
They're
in
like 80
Missouri.
kids. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, they have less, or right at 150 or less.
yeah,
Definitely,
for
definitely.
sure.
So,
Yeah.
what are some key advantages to having a micro school versus starting, say, a charter school?
Yeah. Well, I think the key advantages are the intimate size. So there's obviously trade-offs because you're not going to have a football team and you're not going to have, all that kind of like big school, the economies of scale benefits, but you have that intimacy with the kids. So most micro schools are, their class sizes are anywhere from like 5 to 15. No micro school has more than like a 15 to 1 ratio that I know of. Like it's very small.
Mhm.
So as a teacher, imagine yourself with 15 kids, right? Like every day, all day. It's like you have these 15 kids. And
Mhm.
so you get to know them better. You get to know the families better. Like just the sheer small size solves so many of the problems we see in like a large educational setting, right?
Right.
My father-in-law always would joke with me for years, and I hated it. He said, teaching's just crowd control. And I was always like, we need more respect as teachers. But at the end of the day, if we ask ourselves, when you have 40 kids in a classroom or 180 kids throughout the day as a high school teacher, you're actually doing a lot of crowd control, right? And so it's kind of true. So you're minimizing that crowd control. You're minimizing a lot of that kind of, conveyor belt model of
Mhm.
education where they're getting on and off. And you're really getting to know the child. You're getting to know what they need. You're getting to know the family. And then that's why I think there's so many kind of personalized learning and self-directed learning models that are coming out of micro schools because it'd be hard not to with 15 kids in the whole entire school. It'd be hard not to know what's going on at home. What do they need? What are their specific learning needs? Where are they, struggling? Where are they doing well? How do you teach to their strengths? Like you can just do so many different things when you have such a small learning environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely getting to know your students for sure. When I was an ELA teacher for sixth grade, I had about 40 kids, 20
Oh, okay.
in each cohort. So
It's not
there was
bad.
another teacher. So I was
Yeah.
ELA and social studies. She was math and science. And so
Yeah.
we would flip those throughout the day. I
Yep.
had my group in
That's
the
great.
morning, started with mine. She started with hers. Then we flipped for the afternoon. So we had those same 40 kids every
Yeah.
day, but you, even at 40, you get to know your students, you get to know their backgrounds,
Absolutely.
you get to
Yep.
know their strengths, their weaknesses, and everything about them. So even a smaller class size like that, if you don't know your students within, I mean, I took pride in knowing what my students needed
Yeah.
within like 2 weeks of school starting.
Me too.
And
Yeah.
if you don't know yours quicker than that with 15, then well, there might be a problem there. But
Right. Right.
it's definitely, you can do so much with that size of a group.
Yeah. And a lot of micro schools are actually multi-age. Again, it's like a redux with a one room schoolhouse.
Hmm.
So you're thinking about, if you know Montessori, there's kind of that's they've been doing multi-age forever, but it's this idea that you have multiple kids
Hmm.
and, these 15 kids could be a K-8. There's a micro school down the street from me that has 40 kids and they're K through 12, right? So you're having to, it's kind of breaking down the model that we're used to, which is like this kid is 7, so they're first grade, and this kid is 9, so they're it's more about like, okay, what do you need? You are really good at reading. You should be going way ahead. You are really struggling in math. We should be right where you're at and try and get you there, And so, and then you get that kind of natural mentoring happening with like a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old. And there's just all these really cool things that happen. But it's a different paradigm from
Hmm.
having like a district curriculum that's for first graders. They're supposed to be here by October. It's more about like, how do you create an environment where you can kind of figure out what the kids need and you can deliver what they need. And so there's a lot of homeschool curriculum that's come out in the last 10 years. Because I had this vision for my charter school, which is about 300 K-8. of doing kind of multi-age classes. And then this was 10 years ago, we really struggled to find curriculum that would fit the vision
Mm-hmm.
because most curriculum is for a first grader, for a fifth grader. And so now there's so many homeschool, and I think with the pandemic and, these pods coming together and more people homeschooling, there's more like personalized learning homeschool models, curriculum that you can buy or you can leverage that will allow you to be able to do this without, because I think a traditional teacher will think, so I have 15 kids and they're 7 different grade levels. That's 7 different lesson plans a day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's not necessarily what it is because you're grouping them by ability and you're figuring out what they need. And it's a little bit of that. But now you have a homeschool learning curriculum that can sort of, they go through on their own. And then you have small groups for this and you have that. And there's just different ways to kind of make it work without trying to treat each kid. Well, I have one first grader, I have one sixth grader, I have one fourth grader. And now you're trying to create a lesson plan from a curriculum for each grade. That's a nightmare. It's more about just
Right.
like getting to know what the kid needs and then delivering it.
Right. And you can actually, I mean, in my mind, I'm going to, I'm a public educator, so I'm going always
Yeah,
back to public education. So it's
of
hard for me to flip that. But
course.
I'm thinking you can even take the state curriculum and you can
Mhm.
really truly use a standards based learning
Yes,
model and
absolutely.
not limit it to, okay, this is first grade standards. Okay, yes, these are first grade standards, but these are standards. So once they
Yep,
master those standards, well, if it's January when they master those standards, well, then they can start on second grade curriculum
exactly.
standards. So, yeah, I can definitely see that working very well for sure.
Yeah, and kids tend to do really well. So some of the education savings accounts will mandate if you take the money from the state that you have to do a standardized test. And so a lot of micro schools will do standardized tests because they're taking the education savings money and they're doing really well in terms of moving kids academically because of the fact that again, you're meeting with the kids where they're at, right? And so they're going to move academically if you're doing a good job with it.
Yeah. And so I am the professional development person. Like that is my jam. I love
Right.
it. I loved it as a teacher. I was hungry for it.
Yeah.
That's what I do. I'm a professional development person. So I'm thinking with a model like this, there's not going to be a lot of people to grow with, to collaborate with. And so
Mhm.
what does that look like? How do you resolve that where you're just a one man show,
Yes.
you're grinding it out every day, you don't have a lot of colleagues to collaborate with? Because if you only have 150 students, then or if you have less than that, even, you're not going to have a lot of adults that are
Yep.
in proximity to grow
This
with
is
and
a
collaborate
great
with. So what does that look like for them?
That's a great question. And it's so fascinating because as I was studying the micro school space like 5 years ago and really kind of trying to understand what was going on, I had two questions. I had several questions, but two that kept coming back were number one, how do they pay for this? Because if you have small, like all of us want small class sizes, right? But it's typically, being an administrator for years, it's like, yeah, I'd love to have my teachers with 15 kids, but I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills, right? And so that was one question. The other question is, how do we keep them sustainable for the adult? That's if it's a micro school, 10 kids, that's it. It's one adult. So now
Mm-hmm.
you're doing everything. So how do we make it sustainable? And then the last piece is like, how do they not burn out because they don't have the adult support and the adult connection? So thank
Exactly.
you. And here's why we created Changemaker, because when I was a assistant superintendent, I had 10 schools and I oversaw all of the principals. And then I did leadership development for the assistant principal. So it was like 25 people and they were in 10 different cities. And we would do a meeting at my house every month for the whole day, like a professional development day, because as a principal, it's a very lonely job, right? Because you're the only one in the building. You have to put on your principal hat. You always are trying to frame everything. You can't just start yelling and venting to somebody if they come into your office, right? You don't really have anyone to talk to.
Right.
So similarly, for a micro school founder, I'm like, or a micro school teacher, I'm like, this is going to be a very lonely place. So that's why we created this cohort experience where you don't have somebody in your building if you're in the Changemaker network, but you have a group of micro school founders across the country. I just met with a woman who's in North Carolina. I'm like, well, we have a founder starting in South Carolina. I don't know geography well enough to know, but I think that's pretty close. So, she's like, yeah, that's 3 hours from here. I'm like, oh, I was hoping you'd say an hour. But either way, now we can start having regional pods of people that are working together through the Changemaker network. Now we have our virtual cohort where they're getting together and they're, making friends on the side, but we also have structured professional development time for them to come on and do professional development via, virtually. And so I think that's how we're solving it. But I think it is a question and a problem in the micro school space in general that it's like being a principal or being in a small school where, when I was a charter school teacher, we didn't have anybody that would teach our same grade level. So like if you were a 10th grade history teacher, you would teach 4 sections of 10th grade history. And then you would have collaboration time with your ninth, 11th, and 12th grade history teacher, but you never had another 10th grade history teacher. And that was like, I was like, gosh, if I was at a big school, I'd have that 10th grade buddy that could be like, hey, what'd you do about this unit? And so then when we started replicating our charter schools, we started having like buddies, like, okay, you're in San Jose, you're in Redwood City, but now you both can work together. And we structured an hour a week where they had a scheduled time together to work. So I think it's a great question. It's definitely coming from the professional development lens. And I think it's something that we want to solve for. And I think it would be a problem. But then on the other hand, you're hopefully enjoying your job because you're not dealing with the politics and the crowd control and the bus problems and all those things that come with a big school. So there's trade-offs, right?
Right. Okay. So hold the bus thought for just a
Yeah.
second because I want to come back to that.
Yes.
However, I'm thinking also, even in rural schools, there tend to sometimes be one or two of a grade level or something like that. And sometimes rural schools are very far away from other schools. So you still have that issue of not having someone to collaborate because, yes, you can do some vertical alignment and collaboration. You can do a little bit of horizontal, but you're kind of limited to what you can do. So there's always opportunity. Reach out to another school district and say, hey, I'm a lone shark out here. I need some help. I want to collaborate. I've got ideas I would like to share of things that I've done. Can I join your professional development a couple of times a year or however often you do it so I can learn, we can both benefit. And I have always thought we have cohorts of schools and we have homeschool cohorts and all of this stuff. Why can we not have a professional development cohort between school districts? I've never understood that. It's like, no, you can't be part of our district. We can't share our information because we're in competition with you. Okay, that is absurd. We're educating kids. We're not in competition with each other just because we have a different mascot and we play each other in basketball or football. Doesn't mean we're in competition for education.
I 100% agree. Yeah.
Let's get together and let's work through some of these things. So that's great. On the other issue of the busing. So yes, this is a small thing. So I'm assuming it's just like parent pickup, parent drop off, those kind of things. And then also like lunches. Do they just bring their lunches? Do you have people come in and serve? Are there kitchen facilities? Like, what does that look like? Where are you even housing these micro schools?
Yeah, so you almost have to think about them as like the small preschool down the street. That's what helped me when I was first starting to envision these. So my son and daughter went to preschool with 60 kids. It was like, infant to 3 years old. And it was like 3 little classrooms and like 3 parking spots. And, we had to bring our own lunch and bring our own snack. It was kind of that model. So they're typically housed in it's all in this report, which is great, but I can't remember the specifics, but in terms of percentages, but I know that typically it's a church. So you partner with a church and it doesn't have to be, religious affiliation. It's just like a transactional, like, hey, we're a church that has classrooms. We only use them on Sundays. You are a micro school. Come take 2 classrooms every day and make it your micro school. And then we're getting some revenue. You're getting a space and everybody wins. So that's very common. The other thing that people do is lease out like old preschools or old Montessori buildings or, these small spaces that are a couple thousand square feet or like an old karate studio that closed down. And one of my first charter schools was in a bank building. So, people just find old commercial leases. And unfortunately, with all of these people not working in buildings anymore, there's tons of vacancy in commercial buildings. So there's a lot of spaces and then with the whole Amazon thing, there's a lot of retail spaces open. So there are spaces available that you can get a good deal on in the commercial real estate field. So that's where they go. But yeah, in terms of the lunch and the transportation, again, that's where it's not great because if you're a family that doesn't have transportation, you have to figure it out. But
Mhm.
that said, I know there are some micro schools that are starting, to your point, like collectively join together. And this is part of our vision with Changemaker is like, if we have 5 micro schools in a region, because we don't want them to be right next to each other because we don't want them to be like, like having the same
Right.
students. But if it's like different grade levels or they're 10 minutes away, that we could collectively share resources and then everybody could pay for together, they could pay for a bus and start busing kids and stuff like that. So then you become like a mini school district and you can start to
Right.
leverage your support network and pay for it that way. But yeah, in general, you want to think about it as like the sort of private preschool down the street where it's small. And I remember like the director was, she would teach a couple hours a day and then she'd be doing administration and it's very intimate and small in that way. It's so different from a larger school because you've eliminated 90% of the things that happen in a larger school because it's 15 kids, right? In a
Right.
small.
Right. And I'm also thinking that if you're doing it in a church, there's going to be a kitchen facility, and there
Right.
are always
Yes.
wonderful women and men in churches that are willing to donate some time to cook lunch or breakfast or something, even if it's just a couple times a week where the kids don't have to bring lunch on those days or something like that. So that would be definitely helpful also.
Yeah,
So when we're
absolutely.
talking micro schools, so you have a teacher, but do you have then a principal also?
Yeah, so it really depends on the size. So our micro schools we typically start between 15 and 30, and then we grow to about like 75.
Mhm.
So if you're going to 75 kids, you're probably going to have a director and then you're going to have a few teachers, right?
Okay.
But some micro schools are just like I was saying, one person, and they're the teacher, they're the janitor, they're the director, they're everything, right? If it's 12 kids. And so it really depends on the size of the micro school. And I think the other piece is the parents. You really have an opportunity to leverage parent volunteer and participation, whether it's in the evenings or if they don't, work during the day. And you can start to have them come in and help the kids read or supervise at lunch or whatever it may be. There's a lot of opportunities to bring the parents in,
Right.
and it's so small that the parents well and they're bought in and they want to help out. So there's a lot of ways. When you were talking about the serving the lunch, like I could see one of the micro schools I visited a couple years ago, they did a thing called community lunch.
Hmm.
And so it was like 25 kids and it was a K-8 and every day a different family was in charge of making lunch for the 25 kids or
Yeah.
somehow and maybe it was
Yes.
like there was one person that volunteered and it was like a mom that volunteered to coordinate it. She just made sure that every day they had a community. No, sorry, it wasn't every day. It was every Friday because every day would be too much. It was every Friday. They all had to sit together and eat the lunch that mom or dad made from one of the
Mhm.
families. And one of them was a chef, and that was like their favorite day
Oh,
when
yeah, of course.
the chef came in. But anyway, so you can see the kind of things that you can do with like a tight knit community. And this is what we did with our charter schools in the early days. Like we had parents sitting at the front desk. We didn't hire an office manager until like year 5. We had parents driving on field trips, and then we had a very diverse community in terms of socioeconomic status. And our families would help, and like on a study trip, it would be $250, and somebody would always donate 250 for another kid. So
Yeah.
it was always covered.
Right.
So like communities step up for each other. And it's just really amazing when you start to have that intimate community where people are on board with your vision. That's the thing too, is like our micro schools are different themes. We have a Montessori, we have a STEAM, we have SEL focused. And so the parents
Right.
are choosing to go there and they're like, I really want my kid to get SEL. So they're excited and they're like, how can I help? It's not just like, oh, my kid's going to the street down the school down the street. I'm dropping them off and then I'm picking them up and that's it.
Yeah. This has been a great conversation. Unfortunately, we are at time.
Yes.
So, if anybody out there listening is ready to take the step or find out more information about micro schools and how they can start that, what can they do? I mean, this is my podcast is for new and aspiring administrators,
Yeah.
but they may be maybe an administrator who's like, yeah, that kind of sounds like a really cool thing to do. Or, you know what? I think my wife or my husband who teaches, that might be something that they would be interested in, or my cousin or whatever.
Yeah.
So, how can they connect with you to find out more, get your help, whatever they
Yeah.
need?
Well, the aspiring administrator is actually somebody that I talk to all the time. So maybe they've taught for 5, 10, or 15 years and now they're ready to level up their career.
Hmm.
And maybe you still want to be teaching or maybe you want to do some leadership. So opening a micro school is a great place, right? Because you're able to do all the things we talked about. So what we do is we help you go from the idea to the launch and all the things in between. And we go fall to fall. So we do our cohort starting in the fall, and then we help you launch the fall after that. And it's set up for like evenings and weekends. So you can keep your full-time job and work with us throughout. But anyway, if you are interested in starting with us, it's easiest way to find us is just go to our website, changemakereducation.com. You can also check out our podcast, ChangemakerEDU, and follow us on LinkedIn at ChangemakerEDU and find us and follow us. And like I was telling you earlier, Dr. Mel, I'm back to back to back booked with phone calls because so many people are interested in just trying something different and
Yeah.
creating some better opportunities for kids.
Yes, absolutely. This has been a really great conversation, something different, and I've learned a lot in our
Right.
last couple of conversations. So thank you for coming on the show. And for the rest of my audience, I will have those links in the show notes. You know that I'm not going to leave you hanging, and I will make sure that you can connect with David. David, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. And for the rest of you, have a great rest of your day and weekend, and I will see you back here next week. Bye-bye.